Winslow Springs, Georgia, was the kind of town where the future felt like something that had happened a long time ago and belonged to someone else. Population 1,800 and shrinking, it was a place defined by its silences and its absences. The biggest building on Main Street, once a bustling hardware store that served 3 counties, had been boarded up for 3 years, its faded wooden sign flaking away under the unforgiving southern sun. The only grocery store in town had closed 2 years prior, leaving residents to travel 14 miles down a narrow 2-lane highway with no sidewalks just to buy fresh produce or basic household goods at a distant dollar store. Red clay dust seemed to coat everything, settling into the cracks of sagging porches and clinging to the tires of old pickup trucks that chugged down forgotten dirt roads. It was in this town that 18-year-old Yancey Brooks grew up, not out of preference, but because life had never offered him another option. Yancey was a quiet, slender young man with steady eyes and hands that were far cleverer than anyone in Winslow Springs truly understood. He had just graduated from the county high school, finishing in the top 10% of his class despite working long hours after school every single day. His proudest achievement sat pinned to the wall above his wobbly wooden desk, an official acceptance letter from Georgia Tech's elite engineering program. To Yancey, that single piece of paper was a window into another universe, a world where bridges were built, complex mechanical systems were designed, and lives were transformed through intellect and innovation. But every morning when he looked at it, the letter reminded him of the same harsh reality: close, but not close enough. He simply could not afford the tuition, the books, or the cost of living in Atlanta. Yancey lived with his grandmother, Dorothy Brooks, whom everyone in the county affectionately called Nana. At 68 years old, Nana was a woman built entirely of quiet resilience and unyielding faith. Suffering from severe diabetes and arthritic knees so inflamed that some mornings she had to grip the bathroom sink with both hands just to stand upright, she still worked part-time cleaning local churches to help keep food on the table. She had raised Yancey single-handedly since he was 4 years old. That was the year Yancey's father was handed a mandatory minimum 10-year sentence for a nonviolent drug offense, a sentence that stretched into 14 long years without parole. 2 years later, Yancey's mother left for Atlanta, promising to send money and call every weekend. At first, the calls came weekly and the envelopes contained cash, but slowly the money grew scarce, the calls shortened to brief hurried exchanges, and eventually, the line went entirely cold. From that moment on, it was just Yancey and Nana against the world. Their small, weathered clapboard house sat at the very end of a rutted dirt road past a shallow creek. The white paint on the exterior walls had chipped away decades ago, and a bright blue plastic tarp covered a section of the roof where shingles had succumbed to a severe winter storm 2 years prior. Inside, there was no central air conditioning, only ancient box fans that rattled inside wooden window frames, pushing humid Georgia heat from one small room to another. Despite the poverty, Nana kept the house immaculately clean. Every surface was wiped down, every dish was washed and organized, and taped to the front of the refrigerator was a note written in her shaky, graceful cursive: "God didn't bring you this far to leave you." Yancey read that handwritten note every morning before the sun rose. His daily routine was relentless. His alarm went off at precisely 5:15 every morning. His first task was always to check Nana's blood sugar levels, prepare her morning insulin, and cook her a hot bowl of oatmeal sprinkled with the extra cinnamon she favored. By 6:30, he was walking down the dirt road toward Ray Dalton's garage, the only auto repair shop within 20 miles. Yancey worked there full-time, spending 8 hours doing oil changes, replacing brake pads, rotating tires, and fixing whatever broken-down farm equipment arrived on flatbeds. Ray Dalton, a gruff veteran mechanic who had seen hundreds of young men come and go, quickly recognized that Yancey wasn't an ordinary teenager. The boy didn't just fix engines, he understood how energy moved through them, how metals expanded under heat, and how mechanical design could be optimized. When his shift at the garage ended at 3 in the afternoon, Yancey's work was far from over. He spent his late afternoons taking on odd jobs across the county, mowing overgrown lawns, clearing heavy brush for elderly neighbors, mending broken fences, and hauling scrap metal. Every dollar he earned from these side jobs went straight into a clear glass jar hidden beneath his mattress. He wasn't saving for college, clothes, or a car, he was saving for Nana.'s insulin. The local pharmacy had recently increased the copay on her medication once again, and rather than worrying his grandmother, Yanzi simply quietly decided to stop buying lunch. He saved $5 here, $6 there, enduring a hollow stomach every afternoon so that the glass jar under his bed could slowly fill up. By mid-autumn, the jar held $142 in crumpled bills. Despite the exhaustion of his daily grind, Yanzi's mind lived in a world of complex calculations and grand structures. Every night after dinner, while the box fans hummed in the darkness, he sat at his wobbly desk and opened a worn composition notebook. Its black and white cardboard cover was soft and frayed at the corners, but inside, the grid-lined pages were filled with extraordinary detail. There were no idle doodles or random sketches, the pages contained precise engineering blueprints. He had drawn suspension bridges with exact stress distribution vectors, cross-sections of internal combustion engines, structural load diagrams, and innovative drainage systems designed to prevent rural flooding. Ray Dalton had once peeked into the notebook while Yanzi was on a lunch break and shook his head in utter disbelief, telling the boy that he was wasting $1 million brain in a small-town grease pit. Yanzi only smiled politely, tucked the notebook back into his bag, and went back to changing oil filters. He knew his reality, but he refused to let go of his dreams. On a sweltering Thursday afternoon, Yanzi clocked out of Ray's garage around 2 o'clock. The Georgia heat was brutal, the kind of heavy, thick moisture that hovered over the asphalt and made the distant horizon shimmer like standing water. Dust settled over his clothes as he began his walk home, taking his usual route past the gas station and down toward the bend near an old, dead oak tree. The tree had stood there stark and leafless for as long as Yanzi could remember. He paused, pulled out his composition notebook, and spent 5 minutes sketching the dead oak, not as it appeared, but as a living structure, drawing deep root networks and thick leafy canopies reaching upward toward the sky. That was how Yanzi saw the world. He looked at broken, abandoned things and instinctively calculated how they could be rebuilt. Putting his notebook away, Yanzi reached a fork in the dirt road. Instead of taking his normal path home, he decided on a whim to take the longer route down County Road 12. It was an insignificant, split-second decision made without much thought, but that choice, left instead of right, County Road 12 instead of the main thoroughfare, was about to alter the trajectory of his life forever. County Road 12 was a narrow, forgotten two-lane strip of crumbling asphalt flanked on both sides by dense pine forests and deep red clay ditches. There were no houses, no streetlights, and no shoulders for vehicles to pull off safely. More importantly, everyone in the county knew that County Road 12 was a complete dead zone for cellular signal. If a car broke down or an accident occurred, help was miles away. As Yanzi walked along the edge of the trees, the heat index pushed past 95 degrees. The air was dead still, heavy and suffocating, making every breath feel like inhaling steam through a damp cloth. Sweat soaked through Yanzi's shirt, and his water bottle was down to its final warm swallows. Suddenly, a faint, metallic sound echoed through the pine trees to his right, followed by a human voice. Yanzi stopped in his tracks, tilting his head to listen. At first, he thought it might be an animal caught in a wire fence or a stray dog trapped in a ditch. But as he stood motionless, the sound came again, clearer this time. It was a raspy, desperate voice crying out for help. The scream lacked strength, carrying the strained, cracked tone of someone who had been yelling until their vocal cords were raw and bleeding. Yanzi looked up and down the empty stretch of asphalt. There was no one in sight. Then his eyes caught fresh tire tracks pressed deep into the soft red clay on the shoulder of the road. A few yards ahead, tucked partially out of sight near the tree line, stood 4 massive touring motorcycles. They were immaculate machines, glistening chrome, custom paint jobs, and heavy leather saddlebags so pristine they looked like showpieces. They were bikes worth tens of thousands of dollars, far nicer than anything Yanzi had ever seen parked in Winslow Springs. But there were no riders nearby. The voice called out again, weaker than before. Yanzi's stomach tightened into a hard knot. He stood at a crossroads of choice. He could keep walking, go home to his grandmother, prepare dinner, and pretend he had heard nothing. It was a Thursday like any other, and he had no obligation to step into unknown danger. A dark pickup truck rounded the bend ahead, slowed down slightly as the driver noticed the parked motorcycles, and then suddenly hit the gas and sped away. Moments later, a white sedan approached, slowed down, the driver glanced toward the dark tree line, and then accelerated down the road. Nobody stopped. Nobody wanted to get involved in whatever trouble had taken place off the grid. Yanzi stood on the hot asphalt, thinking about Nana Dot's note on the fridge. He thought about how many times the world had driven past his family without stopping. Then, without another moment of hesitation, he adjusted the straps of his backpack, stepped off the road, and pushed through the thick pine brush into the deep shadows of the woods. About 40 yards off the road, in a small shaded clearing concealed by tall pines, Yanzi came upon a horrific scene. Four large, heavily tattooed men in leather riding vests were chained to two thick pine trees. Thick industrial steel chains were wrapped tightly around their torsos and the trunks of the trees, secured with heavy brass padlocks. Their hands were zip-tied behind their backs beneath the steel links, leaving them completely immobilized. The physical toll of the heat and confinement was devastating. One of the men, a broad-shouldered biker with a shaved head, was slipping out of consciousness. Blood from a severe gash above his ear had dried across his cheek and neck, and his head rolled helplessly against his chest. He was suffering from a severe concussion combined with heat exhaustion. Next to him, a younger rider was frantically pulling against his restraints. The plastic zip tie around his right wrist had been pulled so tight that his hand had turned a deep, alarming purple from lost circulation. A third man sat slumped against the trunk, his lips cracked and white, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. His voice was the one Yanzi had heard from the road. The fourth man was completely different. He was sitting upright against his tree, bleeding from a cut above his eyebrow, but his posture remained rigid. His eyes were wide open, clear, intense, and remarkably calm. Instead of screaming or panicking, he was studying Yanzi as the teenager stepped out of the brush, examining the boy with the sharp, analytical focus of a man analyzing a complex schematic. When the calm-eyed man spoke, his voice was surprisingly steady despite his dry throat. "Kid, get out of here right now," he commanded softly. "The men who put us here had guns. They took everything and left us. They could come back any minute. Go." Yanzi looked at the bleeding head wound of the unconscious man, saw the purple, swollen hand of the younger rider, and looked at the desperate, sunken eyes of the third. He dropped his heavy backpack onto the soft blanket of pine needles, took a step closer to the chained strangers, and spoke 6 words in a quiet, unwavering voice: "Don't be scared, I'll help you." The calm-eyed man stared at Yanzi, a sudden flick of deep surprise passing across his expression. "Kid, I'm serious," he insisted, his tone hardening. "They were armed. You don't know what you're stepping into." "Then that's one more reason I need to be fast," Yanzi replied calmly. Instead of panicking or rushing blindly, Yanzi's analytical mind immediately went to work. He walked a slow, deliberate circle around both trees, assessing the mechanical structure of the situation. He evaluated how the chains were wrapped, identified which links carried the most load, noted the 3 heavy padlocks, and examined the zip ties binding their wrists. He instantly prioritized the victims based on medical severity. The young rider losing blood flow to his arm came first. Yanzi dropped to his knees beside the young rider. The plastic tie was digging deep into the flesh of his wrist. Without a cutting tool on hand, Yanzi grabbed a smooth, flat rock from the dirt and a sturdy oak branch from the forest floor. Inserting the thin edge of the branch between the zip tie and the man's swollen wrist to act as a shield, Yanzi used the rock to tap the branch deeper, creating just enough levered space to break the tension and allow oxygenated blood to flow back into the hand. The rider gasped loudly as feeling returned, his fingers twitching as color slowly crept back into his skin. "Hold still," Yanzi said gently, his hand steady on the man's shoulder. "I'm going to get you all out." "Where the hell did you come from, kid?" the rider whispered, staring at Yanzi in utter shock. "Just down the road," Yanzi answered, already moving to the next victim. He knelt beside the unconscious man with the head injury. Using a clean shop rag he always carried in his backpack, a habit picked up from Ray's garage, Yanzi poured half of his remaining water over the cloth and carefully wiped the blood away from the wound, pressing the cold rag against the man's forehead to cool his spiking body temperature. He then turned to the third rider whose voice was fading. "Keep talking to him," Yanzi instructed firmly. "Say his name. Don't let him close his eyes." Next, Yanzi pulled a small multi-tool out of his pocket, a modest Christmas gift from Ray Dalton. The blade was small, but it was sharp enough to slice through the zip ties securing the men's hands behind their backs. One by one, he freed their hands, but the heavy steel chains and padlocks remained locked around their chests. Realizing the multi-tool could never cut through industrial steel, Yanzi turned his attention to the surrounding ground. The attackers had likely discarded the keys in the woods before fleeing. Dropping back to his knees, Yanzi began a methodical, grid-based search of the forest floor, sweeping his hands through layers of pine needles, dirt, and dry leaves. 3 minutes passed, nothing. 5 minutes passed, still nothing. Through it all, the calm-eyed man watched Yanzi's disciplined, unhurried movements, taking in every detail of the boy's composure under extreme pressure. At the 7-minute mark, Yanzi's fingers struck cold metal hidden beneath a pile of brush. He pulled up a brass key, hurried back to the trees, and tried the first padlock. It didn't fit. He tried the second, a loud, satisfying click echoed through the quiet clearing. The heavy chain uncoiled and hit the dirt with a thud. 2 of the riders tumbled forward, free from the tree. However, the key did not fit the remaining padlocks holding the unconscious man and the calm-eyed leader. Yanzi didn't waste a second asking questions. He stood up and sprinted back through the brush toward the road. Reaching the 4 parked motorcycles, he began searching through the side compartments. The robbers had looted the main saddlebags, but Yanzi's sharp eyes caught a small side latch on the rear frame of the lead bike. Opening it, he found a compact, heavy-duty emergency bolt cutter, standard equipment for long-distance touring riders. As he grabbed the tool, Yanzi noticed small details, the initials GS hand-stamped into the leather saddlebags, and a subtle steel emblem mounted on the frame, a star encased within a navigational compass. He filed the details away in his memory, grabbed the bolt cutters, and sprinted back into the woods. With 2 powerful squeezes on the bolt cutter handles, Yanzi snapped the steel links of the remaining chains. The heavy locks shattered apart. He caught the unconscious man as he fell forward, easing his heavy frame gently down onto the shaded grass. Yanzi then turned to the leader, who slowly stood up, rubbing his bruised wrists. The calm-eyed man looked at Yanzi with an intensity that had completely shifted from cautious command to profound reverence. Without taking a breath for himself, Yanzi assessed the remaining danger. "There's a ridge half a mile south," he said, breathing heavily. "It's the only spot around here high enough to pick up a single bar of cell service. I'm going to run up there and call an ambulance." The leader reached out, placing a firm, heavy hand on Yanzi's arm. "Kid, you've done enough. You're exhausted, you've given us your water, and you're bare-chested in 95-degree heat. You don't have to run anymore." Yanzi looked back at the unconscious rider resting in the shade. "That man needs a hospital," Yanzi said softly, disengaging his arm. "And I can run fast." Yanzi sprinted half a mile uphill over jagged rocks, exposed tree roots, and steep red clay embankments under the blinding afternoon sun. His chest burned, his mouth was completely dry, and sweat poured down his bare torso, but he didn't slow down until his phone displayed a single flickering bar of network signal at the top of the ridge. He dialed 911 immediately, giving the dispatcher the precise mile marker location on County Road 12, a detail he knew by heart because he had walked that stretch of road hundreds of times. After confirming that emergency crews were dispatched, Yanzi ran all the way back down the hill to the clearing. Upon his return, he sat down beside the injured man, picked up his composition notebook from his backpack, and began gently fanning the unconscious rider to keep the air moving over his skin. The calm-eyed leader sat nearby, watching the pages of the notebook flutter back and forth. Even from a few feet away, he could see the intricate technical drawings inside, stress calculations, bridge architecture, complex mechanical gearing, and detailed engine schematics drawn with incredible precision. He looked at the 18-year-old boy sitting shirtless in the dirt, exhausted and covered in sweat, caring for strangers without asking for a single thing in return. "Who taught you to be like this, son?" the leader asked softly. Yanzi kept fanning the injured man, his eyes fixed on his work. "My nana says you help people because it's Tuesday," Yanzi replied simply. "It doesn't need to be a special day." The leader fell silent, his jaw tightening as he stared at the boy. There was no pity in his eyes, nor mere gratitude, there was a deep, powerful recognition of true character. 15 minutes later, the quiet woods erupted with the sound of wailing sirens and flashing red lights. County deputies and emergency medical technicians flooded the clearing, surrounding the injured riders with stretchers and medical gear. In the midst of the noise and confusion, Yanzi quietly gathered his things. He slipped his torn, sweat-soaked shirt back on, pulled his backpack over his shoulders, and stepped out of the clearing. "Hey! Where are you going?" the leader called out over the commotion. Yanzi paused at the edge of the trees, looking back over his shoulder. "Home," he said plainly. "My nana's waiting for dinner." Without waiting for a response, Yanzi turned around and walked down the dusty road toward home, his hands tucked into his pockets, looking like any other local kid walking back from a long day. The calm-eyed leader stood in the red clay dirt for a long time, watching the boy's receding figure until Yanzi vanished around the bend. In 32 years of building corporate empires, negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts, and reading people across executive boardrooms, he had never witnessed such selfless courage. An 18-year-old kid with no phone signal, no weapons, and no reason to risk his own safety had sprinted into danger to save 4 chained strangers, used a rock and a stick to save a man's arm, gave away his last drop of water, ran a mile up a mountain to call for emergency help, and then walked away without leaving his last name or asking for a dime. Turning to his fellow rider on the stretcher, the leader spoke 5 quiet words: "I need to find him." Garrett Sullivan spent the next 48 hours doing 2 things: recovering from 4 bruised ribs in a regional hospital bed and frantically searching for an 18-year-old kid whose last name he did not even know. All he had to go on was a first name, Yanzi, a general location somewhere along County Road 12, and an indelible memory etched into his mind: a lean, shirtless teenager standing barefoot in the dirt, fanning an unconscious stranger with a composition notebook full of professional-level engineering blueprints. As soon as the hospital released him, Garrett sent Hank, his broad-shouldered companion who was now stitched up and bandaged across his scalp, to ask around the nearby rural towns. Hank visited local gas stations, diners, agricultural supply stores, and the county post office, but no one seemed to recognize the name, or if they did, the locals were hesitant to share information about a local boy with a massive, scarred stranger. Eventually, Hank pulled his motorcycle up to the only auto repair shop within 20 miles, a weathered cinderblock building with a hand-painted sign reading Dalton's Garage. Ray Dalton was wiped down under the chassis of a rusted Ford pickup truck when Hank walked in. Hearing the heavy boots on concrete, Ray rolled out on his creeper, wiped his grease-stained hands on an old shop rag, and looked up at the towering man with fresh medical stitches running above his ear. Hank didn't waste time with small talk. He explained that he was looking for a young man named Yanzi who had helped 4 stranded men on County Road 12 a couple of days prior. The moment the name left Hank's lips, Ray's stern expression softened into immediate pride. Ray confirmed that Yanzi worked for him full-time, calling him the sharpest, most honorable kid he had ever mentored in 30 years of mechanics. After hearing Hank's brief summary of what Yanzi had done in the woods, Ray shook his head with a quiet smile, remarking that skipping past someone in trouble simply wasn't in Yanzi's nature. Ray pointed Hank toward the dirt road leading to the Brooks residence, but sternly cautioned him that Yanzi was a good kid who had faced enough hardship in his young life and didn't need any unexpected trouble. 2 days later, Garrett Sullivan drove down that rutted dirt road himself. He didn't ride his motorcycle this time, nor did he wear his leather vest. Instead, he wore a simple button-down shirt and drove a rented dark SUV. Pulling into the yard, his sharp eyes immediately took in the stark reality of Yanzi's world: the blue plastic tarp stretched over the leaking roof, the sagging wooden porch, the ancient box fans rattling in the open windows, and the general air of quiet poverty that hung over the property. Walking up the creaking steps, he knocked gently on the screen door. Dorothy Brooks answered, looking at the towering stranger through the wire mesh with cautious, guarded eyes. When Garrett respectfully introduced himself as the man whose life her grandson had saved on County Road 12, Nana studied his face for a long moment before unlatching the door. Yanzi stepped up behind her, instantly recognizing Garrett by the healing cut above his eyebrow. With genuine warmth, Yanzi asked how Garrett's head was feeling, completely devoid of self-importance or expectation. Garrett reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick white envelope packed with cash, a sum large enough to alter the family's immediate financial reality. But before Garrett could even open his mouth to offer it, Yanzi looked at the envelope, looked at his grandmother, and firmly shook his head. Yanzi quietly explained that he hadn't stepped into those woods for money, and that his grandmother would be deeply ashamed of him if he accepted cash for simply doing what was right. Nana nodded in quiet agreement, confirming her grandson's words. Recognizing that financial charity would only insult their profound sense of dignity, Garrett put the envelope back into his pocket. Instead, he extended his hand to shake Yanzi's. As their hands met, Yanzi felt the cool, heavy weight of a thick platinum ring pressing into his palm. Carved deep into the metal was a distinct emblem, a star enclosed within a navigational compass. Yanzi noted that it was the exact same symbol he had seen stamped onto the emergency toolkit on Garrett's motorcycle frame. Garrett looked into the boy's eyes, telling him that the symbol held a deep meaning, and promised that one day he would explain it fully. As Garrett turned to walk back to his vehicle, he paused and glanced through the open kitchen window. In that single, fleeting glance, his trained eyes captured every detail of Yanzi's hidden struggle. He saw the nearly empty refrigerator with a single bottle of insulin sitting on the top shelf. He saw the glass jar resting on the wooden kitchen counter, filled with crumpled $5 and $10 bills. And on the wall above a wobbly wooden desk, he saw the official acceptance letter from Georgia Tech's engineering department, pinned to the wall with a single thumb tack right beside a handwritten note reminding the boy of God's faithful presence. Garrett sat in his rental car with both hands gripping the steering wheel, leaving the engine off for a full minute as a powerful realization washed over him. Most wealthy men would have respected the boy's refusal of cash and driven away, satisfied that they had offered a reward. But Garrett Sullivan was not most men. What he was quietly preparing to set into motion was something far grander than monetary compensation. It was an act of profound recognition. Over the next 2 weeks, strange, unexplainable events began taking place across the quiet town of Winslow Springs. On a Tuesday morning, a professional land surveyor appeared on Main Street, setting up high-tech tripod equipment alongside the long-abandoned hardware store. When curious locals asked who had hired him, he simply smiled politely, mentioning a routine regional infrastructure assessment before driving away in a vehicle with out-of-state license plates. A few days later, an impeccably dressed woman carrying a leather briefcase visited the local high school administrative office, presenting official legal authorization to review Yanzi Brooks's academic records, standardized test scores, and attendance history. That same Friday, the high school track coach received an unexpected phone call from a representative inquiring about Yanzi's athletic discipline, character, and work ethic, though the representative politely declined to reveal who was funding the inquiry. Yanzi noticed none of these subtle shifts. He remained fully consumed by his relentless routine, working grueling hours at Ray's garage, taking on extra yard clearing jobs on weekends, and carefully adding small crumpled bills to the insulin jar beneath his bed. But Nana noticed. She noticed the unfamiliar black SUV occasionally parked near the church she cleaned on Wednesdays, and she noticed the unusual flurry of official deliveries arriving at the county clerk's office in a town where express mail was a rarity. Ray Dalton received his own unexpected visitor on a warm Monday afternoon, a man in a tailored suit who walked into the garage grease pit and asked exhaustive questions about Yancey's mechanical talents, his problem-solving speed, and the technical drawings inside his composition notebook. After answering every question with fierce praise for his young employee, Ray was handed a sleek business card. When Ray read the name and title printed on the card, his face drained of color. Hands trembling, he immediately dialed Nana's phone number, his voice breathless as he asked her if she truly understood the immense identity of the man her grandson had rescued from the woods. The compass star on Garrett Sullivan's platinum ring was not a mere fashion accessory, it was the sacred emblem of an elite national network known as the Iron Compass Brotherhood, an organization boasting over 12,000 active members across 38 states, operating under a singular founding oath: ride far, give back, and leave no one behind on the road. And Garrett Sullivan was not just a member, he was the national founder and executive president. Furthermore, a quick search of Garrett's name yielded millions of results documenting his primary life's work: founder and CEO of Sullivan Crane Industries, an international logistics and heavy construction infrastructure conglomerate valued at over $2.4 billion. Commanding thousands of employees and managing massive civil engineering projects across the nation, Garrett was one of the most influential figures in modern American infrastructure. He had built his vast fortune from absolute nothingness, starting 32 years prior as a broke 22-year-old driving a single flatbed truck, hauling lumber and concrete across the South just to earn enough to keep fuel in his tank. However, his multi-billion-dollar corporate empire was merely his occupation. His true life's purpose was born out of an unimaginable personal tragedy. 18 years earlier, Garrett's only child, his 18-year-old son, was stranded on a secluded highway outside Knoxville, Tennessee, when his car experienced mechanical failure. Two men pulled over pretending to offer assistance, but the encounter quickly turned into a brutal robbery. His son was severely beaten and left unconscious in the grassy ditch along the shoulder of the highway. For 45 agonizing minutes, dozens of cars and commercial trucks drove past the scene. Multiple drivers saw the young man lying helpless on the side of the road, yet not a single person stopped to help or check on him. By the time a passerby finally bothered to dial emergency services, it was too late, and Garrett's son succumbed to his injuries. Garrett buried his son on a rain-slicked Tuesday morning, and in the dark shadow of that grief, something inside him shifted permanently. He resolved to channel his pain into a force that would ensure no human being was ever left to suffer alone on the roadside. 6 months after his son's funeral, Garrett co-founded the Iron Compass Brotherhood alongside 11 fellow riders. What began as a small group conducting highway safety patrols rapidly expanded into a massive national movement raising millions of dollars annually for emergency roadside support, youth technical mentorship, and rural community restoration projects. The compass star emblem carried a sacred commitment among its members: we ride toward the problem, never away from it. When Yancey Brooks stepped into the dark tree lane on County Road 12, unarmed, without cell service, and facing unknown danger simply to rescue 4 suffering strangers, he had embodied the exact core principle that the Brotherhood lived by. Unbeknownst to Yancey, the 4 riders he had rescued that afternoon were not on a casual recreational trip. They were executing the Brotherhood's annual Compass Scouting Run, traversing rural southern counties to identify forgotten, economically depressed towns for the organization's next major community renewal initiative. Winslow Springs was already at the top of their evaluation list. Garrett had personally observed the town's shuttered businesses, crumbling roads, and lack of youth resources just days prior. The fact that an 18-year-old resident from that exact broken town had stepped out of the woods to break their chains was not viewed by Garrett as a mere coincidence, it was a profound confirmation of purpose. Every action Garrett took while bound to that pine tree had been calculated. While his companions panicked, Garrett had sat upright, measuring Yanzi's composure, observing how the boy methodically analyzed the load-bearing tension of the chains, and admiring how he used a stone and a stick to restore blood flow to a stranger's arm. When Garrett glanced at the open composition notebook while Yanzi fanned the injured rider, his eyes, the eyes of a master builder who designed major highway bridges, instantly recognized that the complex structural calculations drawn by the teenager were the work of a rare mechanical genius. Hank, a retired military veteran, had reinforced Garrett's assessment in the ambulance, noting that the boy possessed the selfless courage and discipline of the finest soldiers he had ever served alongside. Sitting in his office late one evening, Garrett recorded a concise, 3-minute video message addressed to every Iron Compass Brotherhood chapter leader across the country. He recounted the entire encounter on County Road 12 without revealing Yanzi's last name or specific location. He described how an 18-year-old kid with nothing to gain had sprinted into the woods, freed 4 chained men using basic hand tools and raw ingenuity, surrendered his own water and shirt, ran half a mile up a mountain in scorching heat to call for emergency medical aid, and then quietly walked home to cook his grandmother dinner without asking for a dime. Within 72 hours of the video's release, over 2,000 motorcycle riders from across 38 states volunteered to make the long journey to Georgia. Garrett scheduled the event for exactly 2 weeks from the day of the attack. 2,000 riders were preparing to descend upon Winslow Springs, but they were not coming merely to ride their bikes. They were hauling flatbed trailers loaded with construction lumber, roofing materials, electrical supplies, specialized engineering software, full academic scholarships, and a comprehensive life-altering plan that Garrett had personally designed to honor the young man who looked at dead things and saw how to make them bloom. On a crisp Saturday morning in October, Yanzi Brooks awoke to a sound that Winslow Springs had never heard in its entire history, a sound that shook the very foundations of the small town. It began as a distant, low-frequency rumble, sounding like an approaching thunderstorm, yet the morning sky outside was completely clear and blue. As seconds passed, the vibration intensified until the glass windows of the small house rattled in their wooden frames, the ancient box fans vibrated against the sills, and the water inside the glass on Nana's bedside table rippled like liquid silk. Yanzi threw on his clothes, stepped out onto the sagging front porch, and felt his breath catch in his throat. The rutted dirt road leading past their house was completely filled with motorcycles. It was not a small club of 10 or 20 riders, it was an unending, majestic procession stretching as far as the eye could see, thousands of gleaming chrome machines, custom touring bikes, and leather-clad riders moving in disciplined formation around the bend and past the tree line. Every single rider wore a heavy leather vest proudly displaying the exact same emblem on their back, a compass star encased in a circle. Yanzi stood frozen on the wooden steps, his hand resting over his heart as it pounded against his ribs. He recognized the symbol instantly. It was the mark on the platinum ring, the stamp on the motorcycle toolkit, and the emblem on the saddlebags from that fateful afternoon on County Road 12. Behind him, Nana stepped onto the porch, resting a trembling hand on her grandson's shoulder. Tears were already welling in her soft eyes before a single word had been spoken, her spirit sensing that the quiet prayers she had whispered into the dark for 18 years were being answered in a way no human mind could have engineered. The lead motorcycle pulled smoothly into the dusty yard and cut its engine, followed by a wave of quiet as hundreds of engines behind it shut off in unison, leaving a sudden, profound silence hanging over the clearing. Garrett Sullivan swung his leg over his bike, removed his helmet, and walked up the creaking porch steps with calm, deliberate grace. He looked at Yanzi, looked gently at Nana, and then extended his right hand toward the boy. As Yanzi shook it, he felt the heavy platinum ring press into his palm once again. Garrett smiled softly, telling Yanzi that he had returned to show him exactly what that compass ring stood for. Speaking in a steady, resonant voice that carried across the quiet yard, Garrett explained that he had not come back to hand out monetary charity, because he respected Yanzi's pride and moral character far too much for that. Instead, Garrett had brought a series of earned opportunities, a blueprint for a future that Yanzi had worked so hard to deserve. Garrett laid out the plan step by step before the gathered crowd. First, he presented a full, 4-year educational scholarship to Georgia Tech, completely covering tuition, housing, textbooks, software, and living expenses through the Sullivan Crane Educational Foundation. The acceptance letter pinned to Yanzi's wall was no longer an impossible dream hanging out of reach, it was a fully funded ticket to his future as an engineer. Yanzi stood speechless, his lips parted in awe as the burden of impossible financial debt evaporated in an instant. Second, Garrett addressed Nana. Directly, announcing that the Iron Compass Brotherhood's Healthcare Foundation was placing her under a comprehensive medical protection program. She would receive full lifetime coverage for her diabetes medications, home medical equipment, specialized nursing care, and quarterly visits with top endocrinologists in Atlanta. Garrett promised the crying woman that she would never again have to choose between putting groceries on her table and buying her daily insulin. Third, Garrett gestured toward the hundreds of riders who had dismounted and lined the dirt road. Over 200 of the members standing in his yard were master tradesmen, licensed electricians, structural roofers, plumbing experts, carpenters, and HVAC technicians. They had not ridden hundreds of miles simply to offer congratulations, they had brought flatbed trailers loaded with high-grade building materials. Garrett declared that within 48 hours, the Brooks residence would undergo a complete structural overhaul, a brand new roof, updated electrical wiring, modern plumbing, high-efficiency insulation, central air conditioning, a fully stocked pantry, and a brand new custom desk in Yanzi's room equipped with a high-performance laptop preloaded with professional engineering software. Looking up at the blue tarp flapping in the wind, the tarp that had leaked through 2 long winters, Yanzi felt tears finally break past his composure and stream down his cheeks. Fourth, Garrett revealed a massive economic gift to the entire town of Winslow Springs. Sullivan Crane Industries was partnering with the local county council to purchase and completely restore the abandoned hardware store on Main Street, converting it into a state-of-the-art community trade center called the Brooks Compass Center. It would offer free vocational courses in automotive mechanics, structural welding, electrical systems, and small engine repair for local youth. Ray Dalton had already been appointed as the paid head instructor of the facility, allowing his decades of practical wisdom to be passed down to future generations with a guaranteed salary and full funding. Fifth, Garrett offered Yanzi a guaranteed summer engineering internship at Sullivan Crane Industries headquarters, where he would work directly alongside Garrett's senior civil engineering team starting after his freshman year of college. When Garrett finished speaking, an incredible hush fell over the crowd. Yanzi stood on the porch, looking at his worn digital watch held together with black electrical tape, the only tangible memory he possessed from his father. His voice cracked with emotion as he whispered that he had only walked into those woods because helping those men was the right thing to do. Garrett nodded slowly, replying that his selfless motivation was the exact reason he deserved every bit of what was happening. Nana, despite her aching knees, stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Garrett's tall frame. Burying her face against his chest, she whispered that he was the answer to a prayer she had stopped saying out loud. The formidable corporate leader wrapped his arms around the elderly woman, his own eyes glistening with uncharacteristic emotion. What unfolded over the next 48 hours in Winslow Springs was a transformation the county had not witnessed in over half a century. At sunrise on Sunday, the Brooks yard became an industrious hive of volunteer activity. Flatbed trailers unloaded bundles of cedar shingles, copper wiring, PVC piping, and drywall. At 9 in the morning, 2 roofers stepped onto the house, grabbed the edge of the blue plastic tarp, and pulled it away in one swift, decisive motion. For 2 years, that tarp had served as a constant reminder of financial helplessness. Seeing it discarded into a trash receptacle felt like watching a dark shadow lifted from Yanzi's family. By noon, the old, decayed shingles were completely stripped away, by mid-afternoon, fresh plywood sheeting was secured, and by sunset, a brand new, storm-resistant roof covered the entire house. Simultaneously, teams of electricians rewired the aging electrical panels, plumbers installed modern fixtures, and HVAC technicians mounted a high-efficiency central air conditioning unit outside the home. Yanzi did not simply stand by and watch, he put on work gloves, grabbed his tools, and threw himself into the middle of the construction process. He assisted with electrical junction boxes, helped frame structural supports, and asked endless technical questions, sketching the building modifications inside his composition notebook while learning directly from master tradesmen. Neighbors from across the county began arriving, some bringing trays of homemade sandwiches and iced tea, others bringing their own toolboxes to assist the crew. What had begun as an organizational project by a motorcycle brotherhood evolved into a unified movement of community restoration. By Monday evening, the Brooks home was completely unrecognizable. The sagging porch had been rebuilt with solid, level timber, the interior boasted cold, clean air flowing from shiny new ceiling vents, the pantry was filled with months of nutritious groceries, and Yanzi's bedroom featured a sturdy oak desk holding a top-tier laptop loaded with advanced structural design software. Nana walked through her restored home in quiet awe, touching the freshly painted walls, opening the fully stocked kitchen cabinets, and standing beneath the air conditioning vent with her eyes closed, simply breathing in the cool comfort. In the town center, a large vinyl banner was hoisted over the old Main Street hardware store, announcing the upcoming construction of the Brooks Compass Center, while local news crews from Atlanta arrived to document the extraordinary story. The story exploded across national media outlets later that week. Video footage of 2,000 motorcycle riders transforming a young hero's home went viral, attracting millions of views across global news platforms. Inspired by Yanzi's quiet integrity, public donations poured into the Iron Compass Brotherhood's community trust, generating hundreds of thousands of dollars earmarked for regional youth scholarships and rural development projects in Georgia. Within months, local municipal leaders reported a surge of economic interest in Winslow Springs, with multiple small business owners expressing intent to reopen storefronts along Main Street. In January, Yanzi Brooks stepped onto the sprawling campus of the Georgia Tech School of Engineering in Atlanta. Carrying a new backpack containing his trusty composition notebook, he walked into his first advanced structural mechanics lecture with head held high. On his left wrist was a sleek, stainless steel watch, a personal farewell gift from Garrett Sullivan before Yanzi left for college. Engraved delicately onto the metal backplate of the timepiece was a compass star emblem accompanied by 5 small words, because it was a Tuesday. 6 months later, during his first summer break from university, Yanzi was sitting on his freshly painted front porch in Winslow Springs, reviewing complex calculus formulas in his notebook. The quiet of the warm afternoon was interrupted by the smooth sound of a single motorcycle engine approaching down the dirt road. Garrett Sullivan pulled into the yard alone, no motorcade, no camera crews, and no corporate assistants. He dismounted, walked up the porch steps, and sat down comfortably beside Yanzi on the wooden bench. For several peaceful minutes, neither man said a word, simply watching the gentle rustle of the pine trees and enjoying the deep silence of the rural countryside. Garrett turned to Yanzi and finally shared the painful backstory he had carried for 18 long years. He spoke softly about his late son, recounting the tragic afternoon on the secluded highway outside Knoxville, the mechanical breakdown, the 2 men who faked assistance only to commit a violent robbery, and the agonizing 45 minutes where dozens of cars drove past a bleeding boy without a single person stopping to render aid. Garrett stroked the platinum compass ring on his thumb, his voice thick with quiet emotion as he revealed that he had buried his only child on a rainy Tuesday morning. He explained that he had spent nearly 2 decades searching for proof that humanity was still capable of selfless action when no one was watching. He looked into Yanzi's eyes and confessed that when an 18-year-old boy stepped out of the woods on County Road 12 to rescue 4 chained strangers, Yanzi had given him back something he thought was lost forever, the peace of knowing his son's legacy had built a bridge to a better world. Yanzi listened quietly, his heart aching for the grief Garrett had carried for so long. Reaching deep into his pocket, Yanzi pulled out a small, carefully wrapped object and handed it to Garrett. It was a hand-carved wooden star enclosed within a compass circle, crafted from rich, dark mahogany wood that Yanzi had precisely cut, carved, and hand-sanded in the advanced engineering workshops at Georgia Tech. Yanzi explained softly that he had designed it specifically for Garrett, figuring that his platinum ring deserved a companion piece made by the hands of the boy he had saved. Garrett held the carved emblem in his palm, feeling the smooth curves and immaculate mathematical balance of the woodwork. He slipped the wooden compass into his front coat pocket, positioning it directly over his heart. 10 minutes later, Garrett started his motorcycle and rode down the long dirt road toward the highway, waving a quiet goodbye. Yanzi stood on the porch, watching the tail light disappear past the bend until the low rumble of the engine faded entirely into the soft summer breeze. Nana stepped out onto the porch holding 2 cold glasses of sweet tea, looking down the empty dirt road before turning her smiling eyes toward her grandson. She handed him a glass and asked who that visitor was. Yanzi took a sip of his tea, smiled warmly at the open horizon, and replied that it was just a good friend. Nana nodded gently, took a sip of her drink, and remarked with a soft chuckle that it must simply be a Tuesday.